Hey, what's up guys? You're watching the Gamestork. They call me the Gamestork because I deliver, and today's going to be no different. But first, be sure to hit that like button below if you like the content that you see. Also, hit the subscribe button and the bell to be caught up with all things Nintendo, all things PS5, Xbox Series X, and everything else. Thanks for watching. Let's get it. So here we are. We've got information on Sony's PlayStation 5. We have everything that we need except for exactly what the controller looks like and what the hardware looks like. Even with this, even expecting that this would be just more of a informational thing going in, and that we'd see how the operating system works maybe, and we would see how the power distribution would work maybe, you know, a lot of people still seem very disappointed. But I want to tell you why you should not be disappointed today, and I want to tell you why it's such a big deal that they went in such just vivid detail of all these things with the PlayStation 5. Why did they need to do this? Let's jump right in. The first thing I want you to know is you can't judge a book by its cover. Let me explain. Teraflops, which essentially is just a floating point operations point second, that's what that stands for, is not something to judge power of a console or a system or a CPU or anything like that on. Now, it is a good number to go by to say, okay, this obviously is much higher than it could be. However, that's not something to absolutely just make your ultimate judgment on something's power. Let me give you an example. I'm an avid UFC fan. So let's say that you have two fighters that are going in the ring, you have a few months out, or the octagon, and they're going to just hammer this thing out. They're ready to fight. They're ready to go. So you have one of the fighters who has the hardest punch known to man. He has that, like Francis Ngannou, for instance, has the hardest punch on record. However, that's not the only area the fight happens, which is on the feet punching. There's also kicking, there's also wrestling, there's also grappling, there's also jiu-jitsu. There are a lot of areas that cause victories and advantages. Now, you can't judge a fighter's ability based off their ability to punch, their ability to bench press. You could say, man, this guy, he is so fast, he's going to win no matter what. That's not necessarily the case. Just because one attribute or one thing is better than the other does not mean that the full system is going to function better. There are a lot of smaller guys who aren't as muscular as other men in fighting, and they win because the culmination of what they have to offer equals more talent than what the other guys have. So teraflops are like those muscles on a fighter. Yes, they look great, but how do they perform? What's underneath? What training has happened? What is actually happening underneath the hood to make those punches or the processing power go faster? What is actually happening under the hood to separate the things that are taking up all your random access memory and cause slow loading times and things like that? This is where it gets interesting. Had Sony not come out and done this, had Mark Cerny not given up and given this incredibly boring speech, I will admit it was boring, okay, but it gave us so much information as to their thought process, and the general public, I'm sure that they thought that this was going to be one of those things where they're like, oh my gosh, they have 10.28 teraflops. Xbox has 12 teraflops. I have to buy the Xbox because it's going to be way better and it's going to be good. And it's you know, and people are freaking out. But let me tell you, that does not mean that the Xbox is going to run better than the PlayStation 5. It just simply doesn't. They explain that teraflops aren't the only thing that matters. As a matter of fact, under their hood, there are so many amazing things happening, including them separating the sound management out of that main chip that's going to be pushing your power and your console and moving it to its own power source. Like, oh my gosh, you guys have no idea. Some of you do, how demanding some of those sound profiles are to push consoles and how much they slow down loading. This is huge. That in itself proves that this thing may actually run way better than the Xbox, depending on how they push that. So just looking, again, flops is floating point operations per second. It's the basic measure of GPU's ability to perform the types of calculation it needs when rendering a scene. Now, we've already seen that the PlayStation 5 does this well in their demo with the Sony Spider-Man. Computers today are powerful enough that we measure in teraflops, or trillions of flops. Trillions. This is a big number. Again, but this is the muscles on that fighter. Don't take all this with a grain of salt. It does mean that it is powerful, but it doesn't mean it's going to win the console war. This is not the end-all, be-all performance. Okay. Again, these chips are different. The teraflops from one graphics chips isn't always comparable to that of another, because just like those fighters, they're different. They have something different to offer. So if you got an NVIDIA chip versus the AMD, this is apples and oranges. They're going to run differently. Everything's going to process differently. So this is something that I wouldn't read too much into today. However, if I were you, just giving you a quick heads up before we dig deeper, buy both. Just go get both. Be like me, go get both of these things and just call it a day, okay? Because I'm getting the Xbox, I'm getting the PlayStation 5, and I'm going to play the crap out of both of them because, But what really sold me on the Xbox was the fact that they picked up so many studios to be first party, because that's what sells these consoles. Get it? Got it. Good. Okay, let's keep going. So, the same goes for comparing, like, NVIDIA with really any other chip. Now, you can't really compare the performance of two chips based off the singular number alone. If you took those two fighters, you stood them beside each other, and you said, okay, so this guy's going to win because he has bigger muscles, that's not always the case. That doesn't mean his punching power is different. That doesn't mean that his kicking ability is better. That does not mean that he's faster. That doesn't mean that he's better at grappling. There are a lot of things happening under the hood of this console. If the two GPUs come from the same family, like the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X's do, as both are based off AMD and RDNA's 2 architecture, things are slightly more apples to apples, but it's still not only the only indicator of performance. So these are very similar chipsets. I don't want to jump into numbers and do the same, because Mark Cerny already did that, but these are very similar, so you can compare some. However, especially considering what Mark Cerny talked about in the PlayStation 5 presentation, this is not the only indication of power. The fact is, how they divvied up the power processing and also heat processing and core units is huge. They went in and explained that because that is such a big deal, and it's going to have such a big impact on performance that there was no need to jump to 12 teraflops because they had better performance where they were. Just looking really quick at some numbers, okay? We'll look at some. The calculations look like this. We have, on the PlayStation 5, 36 CUs and 64 shaders per CU with 2.23 gigahertz, and also 2 times instructions per clock. So this is big. I mean, this is a really good performance. It's a huge jump over the PlayStation 4 and a huge jump over most anything that we could get right now. It's really good. This is 10,275 gigaflops and also 10.2 teraflops when rounded. So we see this. It's powerful. The Xbox Series X has a lower clock speed, but more compute units, leading to a higher number of teraflops. So you see the difference. Their clock speed is lower, teraflops are higher, so they're more muscular, but they may not have that under the hood, ability to really dominate the next generation. Not saying it's not going to be a better console, but what that does mean is that there are strengths and weaknesses there as well as, the PlayStation 5. They come in at 52 CUs and 64 shaders per CU, 1.825 gigahertz and 2 instructions per clock. So this is also very good. I'm excited about both sets, and they have 12.1 teraflops when rounded, essentially. So we're looking at something that's awesome. It's great. And either way, we're going to win, and I think that we should buy both. But my big thing is, I just see a lot of anger, and I see a lot of people just being upset for no reason over this. Now, number one, don't get upset, because yes, it was boring. Yes, it seemed like almost you were waiting on something to happen in this presentation. It didn't. And Mark Cerny reminds me of Dana Carvey so bad. It's just I don't know. It's hard to just take him seriously sometimes. But what I want to communicate with you is the fact that this is big. This is big. This is big for us. Why? Because we need to understand that teraflops aren't the end all. So this specific measure of computational power, really, if you're just measuring this way, if you're just looking at the muscles on these consoles before they go into war, it looks like the Xbox is up by about 15 to 20%, somewhere in the middle of there. And that's, you know, that's okay. And Sony's not worried about it because, you know, as Cerny said in his talk, teraflops are not the only measure of CPU's performance. And moving things like audio out and, you know, everything that they've done in separating the power resource usage and all this stuff, man, it is awesome. Like, I was blown away by what I saw and how intelligent and great it is, like what they're doing. It's not, so they're literally changing up the way that we think about processing, and I really, really like that, and I can't wait to see what happens. So the clock speed affects many other parts of the GPU, and he argues that a faster clock speed provides more advantages across the board when lower clock speed with more compute units. So which and this is those teraflops. He's specifically talking, he's saying you have more compute units, you may have more teraflops. However, we have the higher clock speed, so our performance is going to be better, especially considering how we've set up the architecture. We're going to have to judge later, you know. Honestly, we're going to have to see what these consoles feel like in our hands, what they play like, what they play games like. But I just wanted to communicate with you guys today that don't stress, don't fret. If you're a PlayStation guy, don't lay down and cry because the teraflops are lower. Your fighter may win the fight indeed. But what I will say is these things are going to be close, they're going to be neck and neck, and first party games are everything. We know Sony's been lighting it up in the first party, and Xbox seems to be looking forward and doing honestly the same thing. I cannot wait to see what they have in store from some of those studios that they've acquired, and they're really going all in with it. So I'm excited about that. Let me know in the comments below what you think about the PlayStation 5. Also, leave a comment so that I can feature your comment in the next video, because I would love to do that. There wasn't one in the last video, but every video I would like to just feature one of your comments and talk about it. So if you want to leave it, leave it. Be sure to like and subscribe. You guys are awesome. We will see you next time, and adios. Gamestork, delivering news, reviews, and playthroughs like a newborn baby.